and welcome to the Atcast, a podcast for the study of modern visual culture. I'm your flavor of youth, Soup.
Wait, what flavor are you? You're a soup.
I'm the flavor of youth.
But what does that consist of?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, great.
Yes. This week, AT stands for Adolescent Throwback because we'll be talking about flavors of youth. But before we get into that, what have we been up to?
What have I been up to? This week I watched How to Train Your Dragon 3 with some friends.
I didn't realize they were still making those.
Me neither. And then it came out, and then my friends were like, hey, you want to watch it? And I was like, I mean, I watched the second one, so sure. And we went to go see it. Yeah, it was fine. I think, to me, it felt like a very safe movie. So it's not gonna obviously have any of that novelty that you had from the first one, and it's not quite as messy as the second one. And yeah, it feels like they just kind of wanted to safely put an end to the series.
See, I'm surprised that there was even a second movie because
yeah, me too.
they showed it and I was like, wait, they're just gonna make a sequel and he's like a grown-up now. Okay.
Yeah.
All right then. Whatever you say.
To me, it felt like kind of like, in how Lilo and Stitch got an animated series and then they introduced like a female version of Stitch.
Yeah.
It felt kind of like that. But they made a high, budget. Well, maybe not a super high budget, but, high enough budget of a film out of it rather than a spin-off animated series.
See, I liked the animated series of Lilo and Stitch. I thought that was pretty good.
I liked it too, but I didn't like that aspect of it where it felt kind of cheap and
true.
phoned in.
It's inevitable, though, a little bit.
I mean, yeah, obviously, because, that's what they're going to do with all their IPs, but yeah.
I mean, I guess I will say I'm a little surprised that it came out in like the year of our Lord 2019. I almost felt like we kind of had put that past us to just be like, now there's a lady one.
Maybe they were already in production, before all this.
Yeah, in like 2000? Is that what you're trying to say?
I mean, granted, the design of the dragon herself, like, we liked how her scales, or like her skin overall, looked very like luminescent kind of sand crystal-y kind of texture. But yeah, it just a lot of it didn't. I don't know. I don't know how I feel. I still have mixed feelings about how they decided to end the series. I know in my heart I was hoping for a different direction that would be more adventurous and kind of build on the whole thing. But I also understand exactly why they went the direction that they went with, which again is the safe direction, right? It's the one that will least piss off people, but at the same time it's probably also the least adventurous direction. So
see, I don't really understand I understand the financial impetus of having a sequel and then another sequel because I guess people liked the first one enough to see the second one, but I don't quite agree with it needing a sequel. Like, I think Hollywood really needs to get over this idea of making safe movies. I know it makes money, and that's what makes the world go around in our delicious capitalist system that grinds workers into dust. But there's a point where it's just like, well, I mean, I just kind of liked that it was a thing, like just a one-off thing, and it ends in a way where it's like, well, they beat the big bad dragon.
And then you're excited for whatever it is that they'll do next, but you have a good idea of what they'll do next, right?
I mean, this is kind of how I felt like 4 or 5 Shrek movies in, right? Where it's just like, they're still making these? Shrek died a long time ago.
I was really, really shocked that they came out with the second one of that one because I was like, oh, they get married and whatnot. That's the end. That's how they end every movie like this, right? Because that was the whole parody of it, right? It was parodying all these like Cinderella-esque movies that end with marriage, but it's with, a Shrek.
I mean, okay, I will not like take Shrek to task because I think Shrek 2 and 3 weren't the worst sequels ever.
No, they're not. By far, they're not.
By far, they're not.
Yeah.
But I mean, you kind of run out of excuses after number 3. You're just like, well, the more Shrek, more of the big green man who does the nasty things with his green wife.
He's so memeable.
He begins to lose all meaning after that many sequels. It's kind of funny how that works.
I have not watched any of I think I watched the second one and maybe parts of the third one, and then after that, I refused.
Yeah. Well,
but yeah, I don't know. I feel like they need to just stop with these, like, forcing these IPs into trilogies, because it kind of robs them of everything that they were.
I mean, I think it's like I get it, right? Where it's a thing that was successful, thereby at least the second movie will be also successful. And if you make a second movie, you kind of might as well make a third movie.
Yeah, but it doesn't feel like they were treading any new ground. Like, they might have felt like they were by introducing, like, a female version of a Night Fury and then calling her cleverly a Light Fury. But it's not. It doesn't feel like it. And then, it's called How to Train Your Dragon 3, The Hidden World. And then the way that they kept referring to it too was just so like, ugh. And then you see it, and then that's it. I mean, it didn't feel well incorporated to me. It again felt super safe.
Yep. Well,
that's the thing I did.
Jeez, I feel like we're past the point where we have to just churn out sequels forever, right? Like, is it that hard for people to get people into theaters to watch movies by a studio that makes, like, good movies? Like, do you know what I mean? Like, I'm not saying that every animation studio on the planet has to be Studio Ghibli, but Studio Ghibli rarely ever makes a sequel, and they do fine.
Exactly.
Right? People watch for Studio Ghibli. They don't watch because it's like, oh, this is Howl's Moving Castle 2, Electric Boogaloo, where there's a Lady Howl. Actually, I would watch a Lady Howl version. Hang on. Hold on.
There it is.
Uh-oh.
You're a product of the machine.
I've tipped my hand. Now all of the advertisers will come out of the woodwork like,
they'll come for you now.
I see we've pinned you down. We understand what you want now. I get
We've
it.
always understood. We've just tried to resist us.
Yeah. I mean, that's true of any marketing. It will get to you even if you think it won't. Until the point when the marketing gets so saturated that your brain starts to tune out the marketing, and marketers have to come up with new ways of marketing things to you.
Yeah.
It's a continual process. It's super fun in, the kind of depressing way in which it's just going to tank our entire society. But that aside, I mean, I would just love if, a studio got to exist and just pump out whatever. And that's not even to say that Studio Ghibli is all that original. They just they just adapt lots of, like, Western stories that Japan has never seen before, right? Like, I mean, Howl's Moving Castle was an English novel.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know. I feel like it would be kind of okay if they just did whatever, but I guess no one agrees with me.
I mean, there are some animation studios that kind of pave their own way, kind of thing, but they're usually a little lesser known than the big house names like Ghibli and Disney, obviously.
Speaking of Disney, Frozen 2.
Oh my god.
A movie for which I haven't seen the trailer, but apparently they go on like a Lord of the Rings adventure.
Oh my god.
Which is like, what?
Why are we all trying so hard to replicate Tolkien's Lord of the Rings? And I'm not even talking about the original, like, book either, or books. I'm talking about like the
Peter
movies.
Jackson movie adaptations.
Yeah, the Peter Jackson adaptations. Like,
yeah,
why?
I don't know. Hold on? Have I told you that I actually read the original story for Frozen, like the Hans Christian Andersen like Snow Queen story?
Oh yeah, I read that like when I was like probably in high school or something.
Hans Christian Andersen is having a fucking panic attack in his grave right now. He's like, oh, my work. What have you? Oh no. Yep. I mean, okay. I remember a time when Disney sequels were not big budget movie titles. They were straight to DVD, like terrible afterthoughts that still somehow made some amount of money and were like barely even considerable to be canonical.
Yeah.
But
like
it was still
Mulan
kind of
2.
hilarious. Like Aladdin 2 or Cinderella 2.
I actually think Aladdin 2 and 3 were more acceptable than something like Mulan 2, which I wanted to throw into a fire.
Oh, let's not even getting to Mulan 2. Boy, oh. It was a whole thing. Yeah. I don't know. It's a very strange period of I can't believe we're still doing this. And okay, speaking of oh god, speaking of sequels.
Okay.
Apparently there's an Edge of Tomorrow sequel in the works.
Oh.
Like you know the movie where they go through the time loop over and over again, and then they finally and then in the Western movie adaptation they beat the boss, and then they get to live happily ever after or whatever. Like, excuse me, you're gonna make a sequel to this movie? So yeah, it makes me cry a little bit inside every time they announce one of these things.
I never watched the original one.
Oh, me neither. I didn't watch it because I was really angry about it. Apparently, it was like an okay movie, but I am a terrible weeaboo, and I'm faithful to the original story. I haven't read the original story, mind you, which makes me the worst like nerd ever, right?
It's fine.
But I've read the manga adaptation by that famous guy
Takeshi Obata.
Takeshi Obata.
Yeah.
Okay, I was like,
no, you're fine.
I have to be really careful because I confuse Takeshi Obata with the other guy all the time.
Yes. I know, because their names are
sometimes also with Tite Kubo, but I'm like, oh, I know Kubo. Kubo's the bad Bleach man. He's also the good Bleach man.
Yeah, I actually only found out about All You Need Is Kill because I'm a fan of Yoshitoshi Abe, who did the character designs, or
nice.
the illustrations and whatnot, and he's the one who did Haibane Renmei.
Oh, I haven't taken a look at that, but
yeah.
I actually own All You Need Is Kill, like the actual physical version of it.
Yeah.
Okay. Although on the topic of movies, actually, and we're just like tangenting into oblivion here, but apparently, like Battle Angel Alita is good? Question mark.
Is it?
Like, apparently it's a good adaptation and a decent enough movie, and like enough sort of love was put in towards the source material, and I mean it's not something that I'm gonna make any statements about because one, I haven't seen the movie, and two, Alita is not something I have any like attachment to whatsoever because it's like like an 80s or 90s thing. But I guess we got a good live action adaptation of an anime?
Question mark?
Cool. I mean that's pretty cool, I guess.
Yeah. I can't remember the last time we had a good live action adaptation.
That's because
anime.
it was never. I mean, if you can think of one, sure, but like I can't. I sure can't.
I think I tend to avoid them, so I haven't even seen that many of them. But every time one comes out, people, roll in with the reviews, and they're like, it's always garbage.
No, hang on. I thought of one.
Huh?
Inception.
Inception?
Inception is basically just a live action version of Paprika.
Oh, yes. But it wasn't promoted as such.
No, of course not. But like some of those shots are shot for shot.
Yes.
Paprika is arguably better though, even.
Yeah.
For reasons that I mean, they have their own merits. I will say that I think Inception and Paprika both understand exactly what they're doing with the medium that they're working in.
Yes, exactly. Mm-hmm.
Anyway, yeah. Is there anything else you've been doing before we talk about movies more?
No, that's the most media culture related thing that I've done recently.
I mean, you can talk about whatever. You don't have to talk about media. This is the part where we talk about things that aren't media, which is, ostensibly our hobby.
Those things are less interesting. Particularly for me, because all I've been doing is working on the animation for our new intro and whatnot.
Yes. Oh, it's so good. It's so good. I'm glad at how that turned out.
Yeah, me too.
I mean, I was gonna save this for like the end, but I guess we should just talk about the opening and ending now. Sure. Yeah. So we commissioned some music for ourselves, and now we have an opening and an ending. It's very exciting.
Holla.
Our opening is by Ska2 Network, and our ending is by Takuma Okada, who's a personal friend of mine. And they're both queer creators of color, so check them out. I'll put their links in the description. It's a fact, dude. I mean, this is us putting our money where our mouths are, assuming we have mouths. Assuming we have mouths, I guess. But yeah, I mean, we talk a lot about diversity in media and how important it is to support the people who do things. This is us supporting people who do things.
Yeah, in our own
there you go.
Small
there you
way.
go. Fuck, dude, the opening is so good.
It's very much something that you would orchestrate.
Listen when so I went and I asked specifically for, like, listen, I know you do like lots of ska stuff. Can you just give me lots of brass?
Oh my god, of course you did.
I needed brass injected into my bloodstream. So anyway, yeah, it worked out pretty well, I feel like.
Oh my god.
I'm a big fan of it. Anyway, I've also, I guess, not really been up to that much, aside from trying to just make it to the end of the quarter. I'm so close now. I have 2 more weeks of instruction, if you can really call it that. I don't actually learn anything. I just read more stuff, which I guess is learning, technically. But I don't learn things in the sense that, like, we get lectured about things necessarily. Although the professor that I have this quarter for 2 of my classes is more of a lecturer than a discussioner. And then he has a specific, like, extracurricular discussion that he holds usually, which I never go to because I don't have time for anything. But maybe if I was, like, a better student or whatever, I might. Well, but that would mean that other things in my life would suffer, and I wouldn't play, like, 3 games of Dungeons and Dragons a week.
See,
why do I play 3 games of Dungeons and Dragons a week?
You being a better student. It's about you being a better manager of your own life.
Yeah, you're right, though. I'm trying to think if there's, like, anything else really, like, super exciting that's been happening in my life. Not really. I mean, there's a lot of... Okay, I mean, I've been really excited about Grand Blue Fantasy recently, but that's not new. But
that's
also...
not new.
But also the current... It's the current event they put up for the anniversary kind of time period is called What Makes the Sky Blue 3. It is the sequel to What Makes the Sky Blue 1 and 2. On the topic of sequels, I guess. Except it's actually good. Grand Blue Fantasy is actually something that gets better over time, shockingly. And it took me, I think, 5 hours to read and experience the story. And it's not even over. Like, I only read part 1. Part 2 is releasing later. It's not here yet. But it's really been incredible, actually. The story for it is absolutely fantastic and has been the perfect culmination of all of the great strides that they've made in terms of, like, world building and storytelling and characterization. And it all feels really good to experience, because the voice acting has always been like A plus, and the art has always been like real good. So, I mean, debatable, but it's always been pretty good, at least.
No, I like the character art a lot, like the design.
Some
art
of the earlier character art is a little bit like, because they're still like really sticking to like the Final Fantasy Tactics thing they were going for, and they look a little bit janky in comparison to some of the newer sprites, which are much more like modern anime.
Right.
I mean, not like generic anime, but like it has a very specific sort of polish to it that the older ones purposefully don't have. So, yeah. Grand Blue has been a fucking time and a half. I have been more emotionally compromised by the recent Grand Blue Fantasies story than I have been by really anything since the last time I watched Into the Spider-Verse. Yeah. I mean, it's shockingly good. I don't know. I was surprised even at how much there was, because What Makes the Sky Blue 3 was not, or What Makes the Sky Blue 2 was not that long, despite the fact that it was an important step, but it was definitely like the middle child in these stories, because What Makes the Sky Blue 1 is pretty good, and then 2 is dramatic and important, but as a standalone story, it's not quite as good as 1, I don't think, and then obviously 3 blows all of them out of the water. So I've been having a great time with that. We've been chugging along with our Overwatch competition, and so far we have only won 2 games out of like 6, 8. I don't know. We've won 2 games, but both of them have been by default because the teams that we were facing disbanded. And but we always we scrim on those days too, because that's when everyone has time to gather anyway, so we're like practicing against other teams, and we usually do pretty well in scrims, honestly, and then we kind of just fall apart when the actual game comes into play. So I don't know. I don't know. It's fine.
Oh,
it's fine.
It's okay, buddy.
Aside from that, I have not really been up to all that much. I don't think. I'm sure there's like something that I haven't mentioned that's gonna like hit me right after I'm done.
Every time
recording.
we have a podcast, like later on, like next day or something, I'll be like, I should have talked about
this is why I always like write stuff down before I start recording, because I'm like, I should write all this down so I don't accidentally forget something.
Yeah. I need to remember, like, at the time that the thing is happening, to write down, like, okay, podcast later, mention this.
Yeah. It's tough because, like, we only record once every 2 weeks. Yeah. So there's inevitably going to be stuff that happens, but I never remember if it's worth mentioning. Exactly. Because I'm just living my life.
Yeah.
And this is also the thing about the every other week format, which is that every time I go back to edit the podcast, I'm just like, oh man, my audio is not as good as some of these middle episodes where we were doing it every week.
Really?
Yeah.
Why?
Well, because when we do it every week consistently, it's a gradual process of like, you know, you just build on the week previously, and your audio gets a little bit better. You get a little bit better handling the microphone. You get a little bit better with cutting filler words out of your speech. And that doesn't necessarily happen when you do it every 2 weeks, because you start to kind of forget after a week or so.
So you're saying like the rate of improvement is just a lot slower because we're obviously recording.
Like there's a little bit of backwards motion, and not a lot of forward motion.
Sure.
But that's okay. Honestly, it's fine.
I mean, neither of us can afford to have a weekly schedule.
Yeah, I don't have time for that right now, at least, and probably not with any other time, but we'll see. Next quarter is looking like I have class every day, which sounds bad, but it's actually better than what I'm doing right now, because I'm not stacking 12 hours of being on campus on one day, of which I really like have stopped spending all 12 anyway. I just kind of go home and I don't go to discussion sections because they don't really take attendance there, so it doesn't really matter to me. I wish I could go, but my body can't handle it. Yeah. All right. Let's talk about flavors of youth. Yes. So, tell me about flavors of youth.
This film, if you don't know what we're talking about, can be found on Netflix if you need to access it. But it is a collaboration between a Japanese and Chinese studio, CoMix Wave Films, which they've done 5 centimeters per second, Voices of a Distant Star, Garden Words, etc.
It's the Makoto Shinkai studio.
Yeah, it's the Makoto
they do the Makoto
Shinkai
Shinkai movies.
It might as well just be called Makoto Shinkai Films.
Honestly.
And Haoliners Animation League, they're the Chinese studio. And I'm unfortunately not on the up and up with a lot of Chinese animations, but they seem to tend to collaborate a bit on Japanese stuff. Like they did Evil or Live, and a couple of other stuff.
Yeah, I think I've seen some Howliners stuff. I've seen To Be Hero, which was kind of interesting. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I think that anime coming out of China is gonna just become more and more of a thing.
Yeah, I think so too.
Actually, speaking of, did you know that there's a Karl Marx anime made by a Chinese studio?
Oh dear.
There's just an entire anime about Karl Marx, and they turn him into like a bishy daddy boy.
Oh no.
Yeah, he looks exactly like you would expect an anime rendition of like a young Karl Marx to look.
No.
It's I mean, that's one way of getting your work past the Chinese censors, I guess. You just make it about communism, which is nominally what China is about, I guess.
Yeah, the few things that I have seen in terms of like Chinese anime, I guess, is like stuff that like I couldn't get into because the pacing was just all over the place kind of thing. Or the quality was like all over the place, so it was hard for me to adjust my very weeboo eyes to.
Yeah, I think that's like one of the things about watching Chinese animation right now is that it's always wildly inconsistent as to the quality. Because sometimes it is pretty good, but then in the same episode, it'll just be like, oh, and now we're just all over the place. Oh, they look so weird. Why are their eyes like that? Oh, oh my.
Oh no.
Oh no. Yep. Yeah. Okay. So to talk about the collaboration work, this is such a weird movie to watch for me. First, I don't know if anyone else has this, but I'm pretty sure anyone who has at this point seen Your Name, which is pretty much everyone on the planet, according to some statistics, which is to say that movie sold a bucket load of sales. But if you've watched any Makoto Shinkai movie, this movie is like really weird because it's like this kind of weird pastiche of everything Makoto Shinkai has done, but devoid of any Makoto actual Shinkai. So it's like seeing his like shadow cast upon the work itself. It's almost as if Makoto Shinkai has like died and the studio continues to make works and they're just like, I can't forget my time with Makoto Shinkai, which is fair because they've done like everything he's ever made.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of how I feel. It's a little bit distressing to me to watch this.
I can't say that you're wrong.
Right, I'm not wrong. I feel like a lot of them are very much like their flavor, especially the last one is flavored very much like a Makoto Shinkai movie.
Yeah, especially the last one. Yeah,
but it's just not as tight and it's not as sharp.
Yeah, we say the last one because it's an anthology of 3 stories. and
Yes.
they're not really super related to each other than the fact that they all take place in China, and the characters at the very end kind of like pass each other by kind of thing, but they don't actually interact.
Yeah. It's very interesting, actually. I will say, because I feel like, I don't know why, but for whatever reason, anthologies to me always feel like a Chinese thing. Like,
Really?
I always feel like if I read a novel or whatever, or not a novel, I guess, because that's not what an anthology is, but if I read stories that come out of China that are translated, they usually come in anthologies.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, there was, I think, I read a little bit of Invisible Planet, or Invisible Planets, I don't remember, which is an anthology of Chinese sci-fi literature, which was very interesting. I wish I could have read more, but I did not have the money to buy the book at the time, so I just skimmed it at the bookstore. Yeah, I mean, let's just get into it, right? So it's an anthology of 3 stories. The first one being The Rice Noodles, the second one being A Little Fashion Show, and the third one being Love in Shanghai. And really, only the first one is actually about food.
Yes.
So I mean, it's called Flavors of Youth, presumably because like they really wanted to like sell this sort of idea of anime as like food porn, which, I mean, don't get me wrong, this is like maybe one of the most gorgeous sequences of food being made, but it's like just that one sequence, kind of a little bit, and then the other 2 stories aren't really about that kind of thing at all. Right, like the Japanese version is like the quote unquote literal translation is from season to season.
Yes.
Like if you just translated each word by itself. So
yes,
an interesting decision, and I have to wonder if it was like a marketing one.
I think it was, because they probably recognized, because food shows are such a huge thing, right?
Well, that's true, and I mean like food shows, or rather anime as a vessel for which one consumes food related media. Which is interesting because anime is almost never actually about food. But they always pay special attention to food. Like, I mean, Ghibli movies are not about food, but they always have the most, like, mouth-watering visions of food that you see.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yeah, the fact that they use that as a marketing thing is kind of but I mean, the food in the first story is really, really great.
I mean, it's true. The sort of opening sequence is definitely maybe the best sequence in this entire anthology.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't really... I will say they don't do a whole lot with it. Because I know it's like a collaboration piece, but you would think that if they're collaborating on something, it would be a little bit more than just mostly people talking at each other.
I agree. And that's one of the things I wanted to bring up when we talk about the story and the plot and stuff like that, is that the anthology is a nice approach. It's fine because you get to see different parts of China and different parts of their culture. But the stories themselves aren't very... It's not meant to be like super exciting, dramatic, Makoto Shinkai, people are separated in space kind of thing. But it feels like they kind of wanted to take a bit of a slice of lifey approach. But it didn't feel like... It didn't have like the investment that you might have in something like Yuru Camp, for example, right? The stories themselves were fine, and I was very interested in seeing these little splashes of different parts of China, but I think that was mostly where my interest lied. Like, it didn't lie necessarily in the characters, because they were like, for me, they were relatively replaceable.
The
only ones that had the strong personalities were in the second one, so it just like, I don't know.
I think generally speaking, I also felt like that. It was a little bit hard for me to actually get into it. Yeah. Aside from a couple of moments. And part of the reason to me, I think, is that the pacing of it is not amazing. Because even if you're kind of going for this very slice of life, anthology of like literally a slice of these characters' lives, right? That's the namesake of the genre. Right. It feels like they're I mean, it's an anthology of short stories, but like it feels like they kind of aren't very short, even though they are ? Like, if you were trying to fit a whole movie in like 20 minutes, that seems pretty short. But honestly, you could take these same stories and tell them in about 10.
Exactly. I feel like I've hit more powerful emotional notes and whatnot of like these similar themes, right? Of celebrating your family, of returning to your roots, and that kind of thing, in like 2 or 3 minute animations, right?
Well, I was gonna, okay, this is hilarious, but I was gonna mention that I've had more emotional resonance with Japanese animated commercials, like cup of noodle commercials, Disneyland commercials. They hit surprising, like the fucking McDonald's commercial. I swear to God.
Oh my God.
They basically hit the same notes, but faster and cleaner and better.
Yeah.
the
Anytime
sort
they
of,
include any kind of dog or child, it's just like.
I mean, yeah, right. But the sort of plotting approach that they take, and the kind of lilting story that is like, yeah, it's a little bit too much.
Yeah,
I think
it is.
I think they try to dig a little bit too deep in there, and they overstay their welcome just a little bit. And I think honestly, it could be made a lot sharper. And I think the project is a nice idea because I like watching anthologies. I think it was like a nice format, and I like the idea that we get anime about like, oh, these are just like little bits of people's lives. We get a little bit of, because this is the thing about short stories. I actually really like short stories, even though I am, a fan of longer works. I like short stories because they give you a story in like a little bit, and they have to condense everything about a story into not that many pages or not that much time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And being able to do that well is the marker of somebody who can, write a really good short story. Like, if you've read After the Quake by Haruki Murakami, it's a bunch of little stories about the it's about the Kobe earthquake. I think that happened in 1980, 90, something like that. Sometime in the 80s or 90s, but the really big Kobe earthquake. And they're really good because they build an idea of these characters, but they also build the narrative of this earthquake without ever really mentioning it. Right? They say like, oh, the earthquake happened, and the stories are never set where the earthquake happened. They're about people around the earthquake and have, and so it builds this image of the thing, right? And so that's kind of what you want to do with a short story. You want to evoke something, but you don't really want to dig too far into the details.
Right.
Or else you're getting to a point where you're not utilizing the short story, right? You're not utilizing the sort of short aspect of it. And
right. Yeah. I think because they were going to divide this into 3 stories, I think it's possible to have done so in a short story format, but they needed to take advantage of the same type of pacing and constraints that a short story has, right? Like a short story could potentially be working within a certain word limit, right? And then they have to hit the notes that they want within that word limit. And so this quote unquote word limit in this anthology is like, okay, maybe roughly 30 minutes of animation per story kind of thing. And it didn't feel like there was 30 minutes worth of content in each story.
No.
And it felt like, like it could have been way more condensed if they wanted to go the short story format. But if you're going to have a longer, word limit, then you need to have more worthwhile content that doesn't feel super padded or poorly paced, I would have been more interested in seeing more aspects of these characters' lives, or maybe more aspects of the places that they came from. Anything, right? Anything worthwhile, but instead it was, like you said, a lot of people talking at each other and even the first story, which was just, it was mostly about the importance of food and the character's relationship with his grandmother. We don't see a whole lot of that.
No,
like we see it
no.
in the first couple minutes, right? And then a bit at the end, and then the whole middle part was just him narrating mostly.
That's kind of the problem I have with it, right? Is that it feels like a lot of the middle bits are very not that necessary. Because I mean, I kind of like it, right? It's okay. I don't hate the sequence where he's just like, and then I went to another noodle shop, but it wasn't as good. But that's fine because there were other things that were charming about it, and this is why it was important to me as like a youth, right? And I kind of like that, but also it felt like after that point where it was like, oh, and then it closed, but then it opened again. I was like, well, okay, all right, we're getting a little bit like lost here in the details. Like, this is a story about noodles, not about, you know, and I guess that's kind of a weird thing to say when, you know, the noodles are supposed to be a shortcut to talking about the youth of this boy as a man, and he's just like, I remember my youth. And I'll talk about this a little bit later, but I think that there are a lot of things about this that speak to me on a very different level than the one that they're definitely intending for you to connect to it on. Because I think that there are good moments in the anthology. And
yes, absolutely.
I think that the moment when like he comes home to I think the best moments in this all revolve around grandmothers. Like, do you know what I mean?
Know.
Like all the little moments that are like really, really strong and good are the moments when he like comes home and he's just like, I want to eat noodles with you, Grandma. I'm like, oh. And then in the third story where his grandma's like trying to open the cookie tin, like I saw you write this down, and I completely agree with you that is like a really amazing shot and a really amazing moment to write in there.
Yeah, it was really good.
It tells you everything that you need to know about the emotional impact of having grown up and not being able to reclaim, you know, your past and seeing somebody who, you know, for, you know, the entirety of your youth, right, was like this like kind of strong person becoming older, right? Mm-hmm. All of that gets captured in like maybe 5 seconds.
Yes,
right?
Yes, a couple
and that was
seconds,
what the first story was about in like 25.
Yeah.
And I mean, I like the whole noodle thing. I like that it's like, oh yeah, you know, my first experience with noodles. You know, this is, you know, because I relate to this. You know, on some level, right? It's like, yeah, I get it. You'll never be able to capture again the flavor of your youth. You know, you'll never be able to go back into the past. You know, but you'll be able to get at it a little bit, and even if things have changed, some things will be the same, which is like what he says with his like actual mouth into our brain holes.
Yeah, the concept is there, and I liked it a lot, but I'm not so sure about the execution.
Yeah,
like,
I
really
completely
love the
agree.
themes, but yeah,
I completely agree. I was like not sure if I was on board with the narration style of the first one, and then it stopped in the second one. I was like, oh, okay. I mean, a little bit, right? It's not as like heavily like structured around the narration as the first one is.
Yeah. The first one is very heavily narrated.
I think I would be kind of okay with that if it was like even that, but shorter, right? Yeah, there are shining moments in this movie anthology thing, but overall the execution of all of them is a little bit clumsy, and I mean, I like what it tries to do, but it's not what it could be.
Yeah, I think it's clear that at least animation-wise, they're quite competent at what they do, right? It's a beautiful film, but the storytelling, I feel like, it didn't have that like not that every one of these films needs a Makoto Shinkai or whatever, but it does need a center like focus, right? Like someone to like really like bring in all the stories and have that strong theme there running throughout, right? And these anthologies, these little short stories, they do have related themes of like your bonds with your family and that kind of thing, but none of them are executed quite like strongly to the point where we're so invested in it, right? I was just kind of annoyed the entire time during the second story, which is about a model and her sister who designs clothes, and I didn't like half the cast in there, and then the other half I was like, okay, you guys are fine, I guess, but like most of the story was just like bickering and this girl trying to find what she even likes about what she does. And then ultimately it comes down to like she needed to be with her sister more kind of thing. And
yeah, the second one overall felt just like kind of the weakest one. I wasn't really sure what to make of it. It's like, okay, well, yeah.
Yeah, I suspect that they knew too that it was the weakest one, because you would usually put, you know, you put your opener, the one that's going to hook people in the first one, right? So that one's the one about food and your grandma and stuff. Second one's going to be the weakest one, and the third one is the one that you leave off with, so that has a memorable impression, you know, a lasting impression. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I will say, if you're going to watch this, the third one does have very explicit implications of, and I say implications of because they don't show it on screen necessarily, except for one scene.
Yeah, they did.
Very briefly of like domestic, like parental abuse. Yeah. And I mean, of course, that's like just the reality of living in China and being under harsh economic pressure. But yeah, I would definitely watch out for that, because even though you don't see how bad it is, you hear it, and it is a little bit like really kind of distressing to listen to.
Yeah, it's distressing because it also is a bit surprising too, because they kind of just jump into it. Yeah.
Well, because I think they prime you a little bit with the first time that we see that in like the little montage of things that are happening, and then we hear the like really big confrontation. And
right.
And I think part of this also has to do with the way that the execution of the story is a little bit of a mess, but the jumping between the present and the past is it's like just a little bit off. I think it's just a little bit off.
I remember thinking while I was watching it, I was just like, wait, are we in the past now or are we in the present? And then it would play a little bit longer. Like, I didn't know right away. Like, it took a little bit more playing through the scene until I figured out, okay, we're at this moment in time, so we're not quite caught up to the present yet, but this is almost there kind of thing. And so it's like, they tried to tell it through, you know, how the main character especially looked, right? You know, when he was in high school, or when he was in middle school, he didn't have any glasses or anything, you know, short hair, he had the gym suit. And then in high school, he had the glasses and he had more of a blazer kind of uniform or whatever. But it was still, and then like right after that, it was like he was like a young adult and meeting up with all of his friends again, and it was just like the way that they kept jumping around was, I know what they were going for, but again, it didn't quite sell it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, for me too though, like as much as I love the scenes with the grandmothers, it also felt like the grandmothers themselves were basically the same grandma.
I mean, yes, you're correct. It really felt like that.
Yeah, which I know a lot of grandmas, they're sweet and they're caring. They care about the grandkids. They're going to make sure the grandkids are fed. But legit, though, both of these grandmas had the same kind of impression to me.
You know what? I feel the exact same way. I feel like both of the grandmas were basically the same grandma. And I was like, oh my God, it's carryover affection for grandmothers.
Yeah, and in all of the anthologies, none of the characters had a close relationship with their parents, right? Even in the third one, where you get to see more of the parents, he's not close with them. In the second one, they're absent because they died. And in the first one, his parents are always away at work.
I mean, I kind of get the feeling that this is more of a cultural thing, because especially with like me, I didn't really interact with my parents all that much growing up. It was really my grandmother, and I think that's
Sure.
probably part of why those scenes resonate with me a little bit more. And
I just was hoping a little bit for something a little bit more different.
yeah, I'm not sure why the first and the third one kind of like leaned into that a little bit. And the first one even just kind of forgets about it, I feel like, for the entire middle section, and then they're like, oh right, the grandmother, okay.
Yeah, I think the reason that they did that was because he was obsessing over these noodles basically in the narration, right? And it wasn't until the end that he realized the reason why he cherished the noodles so much was because of those early memories with his grandmother. And that's when it hits him, like, that's the importance of why I think these noodles are so important in my life, and why I've been so, jaded or whatever by growing up and not being able to have that same taste in the city. And
yeah, I feel like I don't know. I also feel like the visual storytelling gets a lot worse after the first sort of scene where he's like making the noodles, because I feel like that scene there's no like words when he's making the noodles. I don't remember exactly, but
yeah, I don't think so. I don't remember though.
But you get a sense of just how loving and warm they are. Yes. And the emotions that we're supposed to feel just from the way that it's depicted visually and the way that it's animated. You can tell that the way that it's made is with love, and that it represents something that isn't just, oh, it's just a bowl of noodles, right? It literally represents warmth and childhood. And then they kind of forget that. I feel like the directing is not quite as sharp in the second and third stories, which is why in the third story, like, there's just that one scene with the grandmother, and it almost feels like it's by accident how good that one moment is.
Yeah, right?
Because the rest of it is a little bit lackluster. And I mean, there are a couple of moments, like the one where he trips over the bricks when he's going to his place. I was that. Yeah, okay, that's a good like, moment of visual storytelling. It's a very good moment of like, yeah, some things haven't changed. And aside from that, though, the directing is a lot less sharp, and it is just a lot of people talking at each other. It doesn't feel like it's like a really high budget production, even though, the first sequence is gorgeous, right? When he's making the noodles, and some of the backgrounds look pretty good, and all the characters, their designs look, I mean, they look mostly pretty generic, but like, in a way that is not offensive to my eyes. Right. And, the backgrounds look pretty good, but in motion, it doesn't feel as vibrant most of the time as you feel like it should. And I think maybe part of that is just due to the fact that like they're like the character art all looks like Makoto Shinkai movies, and those are always like really high budget productions where they're just like, we put lots of money into this because Makoto Shinkai makes loads of money. Right?
Yeah. I think you don't necessarily need a high budget to be able to make a good film, but this series, it needed, in that case, to highly focus on the storytelling and then let that carry the anthology versus letting the backgrounds and the collaboration with with the Chinese culture try and carry it, which I feel like if they had approached the storytelling more stringently, and also like incorporated that well with the cultural storytelling, that would have been able to sell the anthology way better than all of the pretty scenery. Because it almost, at one point I was just like, is this just like a reason for you to like show off all of your beautiful landscapes? Like, I don't like, I understand you're trying to show like, oh, China, these places in China are so grand and beautiful, and show that to people who might not necessarily be able to go there. But it needs to be tied together with something. And I don't think the story was strong enough to do so. And the character animations were again, they were fine. They were passable, right? They weren't like anything that I'm like, oh my God, KyoAni, you better watch your butts or anything like that, right?
Yeah, it really felt like I was watching like a sort of mid-table serialized anime all at once.
Yeah, I can see that.
Right? It has like a really strong opening, and then the rest of it is like, eh.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I wish it was better a little bit, because I'm really into what it tries to do. Because I like this idea of like, okay, well, these are all stories centered around like, you know, family and life in China, I guess. But aside from a couple of shots of like the city and of what the city looks like from above, there's very little indication that they're like necessarily even in China. Like, that's not to say that it doesn't feel like it is set in China, because I think it does feel like that. I think that the way that it juxtaposes both the countryside and the city, and the way that it juxtaposes the sort of older buildings in the city with the newer buildings outside, it does have a specific sort of Chinese flavor to it. Mm-hmm. But I feel like if we had a little bit more of that, and the makers of this were a little bit more conscious of it, that might be a little bit, it might be a little bit clearer. And this is going to get into what I felt about the whole thing, aside from it was like, okay, right? I feel like this piece does not quite understand the things that it's talking about. Because it has these I'm gonna go ahead and say they're pretty generic stories about family and whatever, and like, because they're all about trying to go back to some youth, right? About recapturing the flavors of youth, and they don't really understand that at all. And this is a specific character of growing up now, right? And this is something that reads really easily to me, because I'm someone that grew up now, right? Because it feels a lot like there is a lot of anxiety about the future, right? This is a very anxious piece, and it feels like the rapid technological development is leading to a place where not only can we not recapture our youth, but it's completely lost to us. And I feel like there are a few places where this is starker than in China, right? Or in Korea, where 20 years ago, buildings that were maybe 10 feet tall are now skyscrapers, right?
Right.
There is a very specific element of I mean, history, I guess, like of time there that doesn't get tackled in any really meaningful way. Because, you know, it's like they talk about this and it feels like they're so close, right? Because they're talking about this, because in the last story it centers around this tape recorder, right? And he's like, oh, what year do you think it is? No one has a tape recorder, right? And like it perfectly encapsulates this idea of like this anxiety around growing up in such a rapidly developing time. But it just doesn't quite make the conclusion there. And it's just like, tape recorder, good.
I really liked the entire segment from when he arrives back at the old neighborhood, runs into his grandma's house. Grandma's like, you know, like, oh my gosh, I don't cook as much anymore since it's just me. And then you see the picture of the grandfather, you know, out at the altar, and then the cookie tin and stuff. And then he abandons all that because he has to go get the tape recorder, right? And I mean, the cassette player. And so that whole section where he's also talking with her about the demolishing of the old neighborhood, because this is taking place in Shanghai, right? And as we all know, China has been and will continue to demolish all of these old neighborhoods in favor of new buildings that no one will occupy.
Right, exactly.
Because no one can afford them, right? Because they're trying to look modern, and
that's money, baby.
They're advancing way too fast beyond their means, and And so they could have, I felt like, addressed that a bit more strongly, right? But it was such a short segment within this long story because that's not what they were focusing on. They were focusing on this relationship between this boy and this girl and their cassettes. And I understand that, but it feels like it was a missed opportunity in a sense.
Well, I mean, I completely agree because I don't think that everything has to be a biting criticism of society. But I do think that there needs to be some awareness of the things that are affecting this, right?
I think they had a chance for a really unique perspective on it, right?
Right.
By addressing it in the terms of someone who used to live in these old neighborhoods.
Well, that's exactly it, right? Because at the end of the story, you know, he's in like a motel that's been built on his like grandma's old house, and that's just kind of it. That's just it. It doesn't address that. It doesn't talk about it. It doesn't deal with it in any meaningful capacity. Yeah. And I think that's really important. I think that's almost like the central sort of pillar that connects all of these things, right? Where the first story, you know, he goes into that you know, fast food chain or whatever, and he gets the beef noodles, and he's just like, oh, the machine cut noodles are too perfect, right?
Right.
And right? Yeah, like it's obviously noodles that are handmade and made by somebody who, you know, really cares about them are going to be better, and that is a kind of characteristic of living in a not as urbanized space. And the second story about, you know, it's like, oh, our parents are dead and we really like to like dress up, and they're always trying to like, get back to that idea. And I think that the second story doesn't deal with this as much, which I think is probably why it's the weakest. And then the third story is like literally about development and like destroying the past in order to create a future, right? And it gets so close to grappling with these themes. It gets so close to the realization that part of the reason that these characters literally feel like this a little bit is because of the way that, you know, things are developing. And for a story that is meant to be about people and meant to be about humanity, that's important to look at. You know, it's important to say, like, it's important to look at that and say, like, well, who are they developing for? Nobody, right? They're not developing for people.
Right.
They're not developing so that, you know, people can really live there. It's a status thing. You know, it's the literal space in which you inhabited as a child is being destroyed for something else.
And that's what here's another reason why I wish that they had explored this more, is because that's something that would be perhaps harder or worth much higher of a budget if they had done it as a live action, right? I struggle with this anthology because I feel like it could have just as easily been a live action. The food scenes are irreplaceable, and some of the moments, like the emotional beats with the grandmother, those can be replicated in live action. And so I don't know, aside from the really hyper colorful landscapes and the food scenes, why this needed to be made into an animation versus a live action. And if they had explored some of these themes that would have been much harder to film, such as like the juxtaposition of the old neighborhoods versus the new ones, and showing, like, you know, the demolishing and whatnot, and all of that stuff, like all the different places that this film takes place, that these anthologies take place in, I feel like they didn't take full advantage of the media that they are working in. And it's a shame because they're, like I said, they're obviously a very competent, you know, team. They're both studios seem to work just fine. All right, they made competent animations, and that's why I don't. So it's like you said, they get so close. They just pushed it a little further, and I don't know if they intentionally veered away because they were like, oh, we need to keep this lighthearted slice of life but with deep themes, or if they just didn't realize, right, that they were only like kind of dancing on the line versus actually like grasping it.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of anxiety in this anthology that it doesn't recognize or realize is even there. There's a lot of tension between the past and the present, but it doesn't grapple with that in any meaningful way. It is like, oh, we can never return to the past, and some things will change and some things will stay the same.
Right.
And like we just have to look towards the future. Well, I mean, no, right? Like sure, you can't fixate yourself on the past and never think about the present or the future. Mm-hmm. But to look at this, to look at this development and say like, well, I mean, what can be done? Well, a lot of things can be done. Like it's not the end all be all. And if it is, right, then talk about that. Like just show that in your character. Like he almost doesn't care that the place is gonna be demolished. And like that's his like grandma's house. That's right.
Yeah. He expresses more. I mean, he obviously expresses concern about like, Grandma, don't you want to move? And then she's like, oh, they stopped the demolishing like right over there across the street, so I don't feel like I need to, or like it's difficult to leave, kind of thing. And then it immediately launches into, back to his narrative.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like if it had grappled with this idea, and if it like I mean I don't want to be like that guy, but if it was a little bit smarter, I think it would have realized that.
You're like, that guy.
I was that guy. No, I mean that isn't to say like, oh, they're dumb. No, it's just reductive to talk about things in this way, right? To just have this story be it's almost like they're purposely trying to universalize it, and that's like the perfect way to make a story meaningless.
Yeah, because it makes really everything kind of bland, right? Because the opportunity here is that they're showing specific slices of China, right? These different provinces in China. And there are like places that I've visited that feel so awkward with the juxtaposition of we're trying to modernize aggressively versus the old technology that is still like they haven't been able to get rid of because they haven't been able to put enough money to modernize it yet, right? And they hardly explored that at all, aside from showing like a couple of panning shots of the old neighborhood versus the new neighborhood surrounding it around in the third story. This
is characteristic of a lot of Eastern Asia. I mean, Japan kind of got over this somewhere around the 90s, I think. After the 90s depression, they were like, well, I guess we're fine with this now. We just live in a sort of corporate capitalist hellscape, and that's just how it is. And places like Korea and China are just coming around to this sort of thing.
Yeah.
And China is like where I think you see it the most starkly, where you have this rapid modernization faster than any other development in history.
Exactly.
On top of a country that is sitting on centuries, like a millennia of history.
Yes.
Their history stretches, and this is characteristic of a lot of, I think, of Chinese sort of cultural space, which is that there is an incredible amount of tension between modernity and history, and trying to sort of reconcile the culture of what was with the modernity of what is now and what will be. And in a way, it almost feels like a betrayal of the sort of millennia of culture that they've built up to take modernization as a Western ideal and essentially just do that as hard as possible, right?
Yeah. And demolish all of your previous culture.
Right. There is, I mean, and this is, I think, maybe like more of a personal thing for me, right? Where I have a great amount of love and nostalgia and complicated feelings about spaces like that, right? About spaces that are old and not, I guess, optimal, right? But filled with and imbued with emotion and memory. And I've been in a lot of places like this in Korea, right? A lot of more rural places, and houses and buildings have a lot of, sort of feeling to them. And even this isn't like just strictly an Asian thing either, right? Like even apartment buildings here that I go to sometimes in America that are a little bit older, I can see like, well, yeah, like,
Yeah.
And I promise, if you go into any old person's house, you'll find this, right? Like if you go into an old person's house and they're the kind of old person that just like jam packs all their shelves with things, like my grandparents, like you'll kind of feel it, right? They've made that space their own, and it has a sense of persistence and history and chronology to it that modernity erases.
Yeah, and I feel like this theme of, gentrifying these old neighborhoods and in favor of modern apartment buildings and hip hangout places for young people.
Right. It's not even hangout places, though, is the thing.
Yeah.
It's like places where you spend money with your friends.
Exactly. These kinds of things can be found like internationally, right? Like in lots of old neighborhoods, they'll be trying to rent out the old residents in order to take over the land and make it into something newer. But it's so unique in China to have it happen so savagely and so fast, and that's why it made international news that what they were doing in China for like the Olympics, for example.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it just, I wish they went there soon. Like they don't need to go hardcore in the drama, but they could have offered that unique perspective aside from the little splash that we get of grandma in her house alone because grandpa isn't there anymore. I
think it's because, at the end of the day, this is an anthology claiming to be like about people, but it's not really. at least not most of the time, right? It's about like archetypes. It's about stories
it's more about archetypes, and
it's about universal stories, which is like
exactly
the
doesn't
greatest
feel unique
way
to
it's like the easiest way to erase your work of any personality. I don't feel like I've come out the other side of this having really had any kind of experience aside from watching those noodles be lovingly made, right? It kind of feels like the noodles were the best character in this anthology, right? And I don't know. I think that it could have been a lot better if they went more specific with it and they were a little bit sharper with the directing, a little bit tighter with the editing.
Yes.
And maybe not as like lenient with the timing, right? I would easily take 3 more stories if it meant that they were all a little bit tighter even.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
I feel like these stories could be told in half the time. And that's not like an efficiency thing, that's literally like an emotional thing. I think that
an emotional pacing kind of thing. Mm-hmm.
I think that with something like an anthology, it's important that you be able to convey your story in as few like beats as possible, I think, or at the very least, like you need to really execute that well. And
you just need to economize your time, economize exactly where the beats
don't
are
economize because capitalism is bad, but
I mean, be mindful,
be better at quality. Do a better quality. Don't quantify. Down with capitalism. Yeah, I mean, I am very like, and this is like I'm joking, right? But a little bit I'm not. I think that there is an important way that we and this is like something that I've been trying to cut out of my vocabulary, which is I try to cut out words that are like really heavily sort of flavored by the cultural sphere that we live in of this idea of efficiency and economy, right? I kind of don't like that, right? Because it's not about like numbers necessarily, but it is about quality. And if you cannot deliver if you cannot fill 20 minutes, then surely it's just better if you do 10, because all the qualities will just kind of be squished together and it'll be a little bit better.
It's
important to
being
me.
a little bit smarter about it, and that's what I mean by economizing. Is just being more resourceful about the time that you're given, and knowing that the story that you have right now doesn't sufficiently fill that time. So you need to either put more content in it or shorten it.
Yeah, your story should be as long as it needs to be to tell what it's trying to say what it's trying to say.
Yeah, especially with something as expensive as an animation, where you're like if you're animating it frame by frame,
you're kind of like on a budget, and it's strange to me that an anime can be plotting, because it's like, well, then why did you put more animation in? You could just not.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's like the kind of like padding animation, or like they just felt like this was the right pace for this, but it ended up not being. I don't know, but yeah, there was some kind of misjudgment there that mishandled these stories in a way that, even as generic as they are, they could have hit a little more powerfully, I think, or been a little more memorable if the pacing had been better.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I think overall it was a fine watch.
It was okay.
I'm not like, I don't hate it, but I also don't love it. It's kind of middle of the road for me.
That's how I feel too. Like, it's a little bit. I feel like it's like not a solidly good show. It's a solidly okay show.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. If we're talking about like bad, okay, good, and great, right? This is an okay show.
Did you just come up with a rating system for our podcast?
Yes.
How dare you?
Bad, okay, good, great.
How dare you? You need to leave.
Listen, it's not a numerical system, and that's all that's important.
Like, this gets a rating of 3 soups out of soup.
Yes, I give it 4 soups out of soup. What is the rating out of? I don't know.
Soup.
4. I give it a
flavors.
You know what? That's it. I'll start giving them arbitrary numbers.
No.
This one gets a 4. 4 out of what? Yes.
Yes.
Mob Psycho, I give a 3.5.
Oh my god.
What does that mean in relation? You'll never know.
People will get angry because it's less of a number than 4.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's solidly okay. That's literally, it's not that memorable, honestly, aside from that noodle like, I'm just still thinking about the noodle sequence. Why is it the only thing I can remember from this goddamn thing?
Because you're a foodie. But
I
also,
do like
it was
food.
really, really well done.
Oh no, yeah, that was fantastic. I just don't understand why anything else wasn't animated with that amount of love and attention. It's like they don't care about the characters, but they care about the noodles a lot.
It was a great first impression into the movie, and I was pretty excited because I was like, is the rest of the movie gonna be like this? And it wasn't.
That is legitimately what I felt like a little bit, right? I was kind of disappointed after the first sequence. I was like, oh, we're okay.
Yeah.
That's the only one we're getting. All right.
That's all you get.
I see. Okay. All right.
Awkward.
Okay. Yeah. I don't know. I wanted to like it. I wanted to like it a lot more than I did.
Yeah.
I think it's just devoid of any personality. You know what I mean? It feels like they made it, and then they were like, "We did it. We made a thing." I'm like, "Cool.
The remnants of Makoto Shinkai.
It's like, well, we took one of Makoto Shinkai's shed skins that he leaves around the office, and then we boiled it. And we made it into beef noodles. We bought the beef noodles from a store in a package, and we flavored it with salt and pepper.
I think that's too harsh. I think it's fine.
What, you don't think that watching this is like drinking the broth made from the shed skin of Makoto Shinkai as he escapes to a higher being planet?
I am excited for his next film because, Makoto Shinkai, but...
God, here's the thing. Makoto Shinkai is someone who completely understands the time frame he wants to work in. His stories are as long or as short as they need to be.
Exactly.
And that is great.
Yeah.
He's just like, I'm going to make you sad in 25 minutes. This time,
let's go.
This time, 5. And you're like, well, damn, Makoto Shinkai, you sure did. I'm sad now. And he's like, okay, this one is 90. And then at the end of the story, you're like, ah!
Yeah.
I mean, that's it. I think that's all I have to say about this.
I think we talked about it. As soon as we wrapped it up with Makoto Shinkai broth, I think that's where we need to end it. Call it there.
You don't like my delicious metaphor? You don't like the word picture that I'm painting for you?
No.
He had to shed the skin so that he could escape this. Like a lizard chopping off his own tail.
No, stop.
Makoto Shinkai movies are good. You should watch Makoto Shinkai movies. They're basically all the same movie, but a little bit different each time, just a little bit. But they're good. It's a good single movie. Okay, that's not fair. Makoto Shinkai has one theme he really likes to deal with, and then he makes that over and over again, and it's good every time. Okay, done.
Yeah,
End of story.
There you go. That's what it is.
Okay.
Okay.
What are I guess we wrap up now.
Yeah.
What are you up to this week? Where can we find you?
I am still playing Kingdom Hearts 3. I think I got like 2 more worlds, I think, to explore, and then we'll be in end game territory. So that'll probably be the next couple of weeks. Aside from that, I've been doing more pixel art on my channel, twitch.tv/SwanDrawn. You can also find me on Twitter and Instagram. Same name, but with Instagram, there's a period in between Swan and Drawn, because who needs unified branding, right? And
unified branding is for chumps. Chumps like chumps.
Me. Chumps like you. You're a soup everywhere. Yeah, that's it for me. What about you?
You can find me at all the places at Literal Soup. If I'm on a place, it's there. This week, I am dying. Which is normal, but, you know, I am unfortunately really at the tail end of my classes this quarter, which means I'm really buckling down and getting all my work done. Even though what I really want to do is like curl up and lie in a ball and just not think about anything, and then get up and play Apex Legends and Grand Blue and then go back to sleep. But I have to be a responsible human being, so I can't do that all the time, unfortunately, as much as I want to.
I feel that.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly can't think of anything interesting that I will really be doing. I think I'm just following the schedule until it works out, basically. Yeah. Apex Legends, super fun. Grand Blue, it's fun. That's it. I don't know. I can never tell what's going to happen before the week happens, because sometimes I have something exciting in the distance, and then other times I'm just like, I don't want to think about anything up there because that's where finals is.
Well, that means if something surprising happens, you'll be able to talk about it next time.
I guess so. We've already talked about the opening and the ending. Again, the opening is by Scott T Network, and the ending is by Takuma Okada. You should check them both out because they're great. You can check out our Twitter at AbsoluteCast on Twitter.
Absolute Cast.
We'll put updates and episode stuff and sometimes bonus commentary if I'm really feeling like it. And yeah.
You do like to write them words.
Sometimes I have words that like I think about after, because hindsight is like that. And sometimes I don't have all my things prepared. Ever. But yeah, that's where you'll find us. Yep. Ciao.
You said you'd come up with a different one.
Well, I didn't say I'd come up with a different one by this week. I said
Oh my
sometime in the
God.
future.
I could have sworn that you said.
Well, we'll think about it next week then. I'll have one for the next time we record. By which I mean I probably won't.
You won't because you'll be too busy dying.
You're absolutely correct.
さようなら、また明日ね。